So here on the operating trolley again, we have another Nissan Leaf battery. This one's a very tired 30 kilowatt hour that I'll break to get the modules out of it to build solar storage, and then the empty battery case, which will have its BMS and all the cable and everything, will be a perfect candidate for fitting cattle type cells. So we're going to go for this one. I'm going to show you everything on it, even down to dismantling the individual modules out of the system and strength testing them with the specific tester that I have, which charges them up and does a drop test on them afterwards. So yeah, here we go. The first step, predictably, is to put some of the fantastic rust remover onto all the bolts so that we've got a chance of getting them out without them snapping. This one's quite rusty, so I'll give them a day or so to soak in. We're going to have to take the 6 bolts out of this aluminium sealing plate as well. But before I even touch it, I'm going to remove the cut-off switch. Sometimes they come up easily. Sometimes these spikes at the outside get a bit difficult, so I'm just going to get a tool onto that. It's always useful to know how these work, just in case you need to shut your battery off at any stage. The first part of it is just a lift, but it does have these little plastic clips which can be a little bit sticky when they get a bit old. I'm going to use a little lever underneath the back of it just to get it going, and then I'll show you the second stage. So rather than breaking my fingernails or anything, just put a little pry bar underneath there and it started coming up. That then lifts up part of the way. It's still very stiff. When it gets to about this height, you need to release the second safety catch, which is here, and that's locking in down underneath. So when you press that one further in, this will go all the way up to vertical. Once that's done, it just draws off. What I like to do once I've got them off is just spray a bit of silicone lube in both sides, and it just makes it much easier to fit and remove later on. So all we need is a 10mm ratchet. I use an air ratchet because it just saves a lot of time, and I have this magnetic dish that I can put all the bolts in. There are 2 different types of bolt on these. The corner bolts are different to the middle bolts. The middle bolts have stepped kind of shoulders on them to make sure that it pulls down just the right amount. The corner bolts, where the surfaces go together, they're just straight threaded bolts, but it's worth remembering for when you put it back together. So once the 6 bolts are removed, this metal plate just lifts clean away. Underneath it there's a rubber sealing ring under here to stop water from going down inside the battery. So what I'll do before I do anything else is just give this a blow off with the airline to make sure there's no crud that goes down into the battery. Going to just put these bits to one side and then do the bolts around the edges. So please excuse the compressor running in the background while I'm getting this battery stripped down. Having given the Rostov a chance to work for a couple of days, it's done its magic and all of the bolts have come out nice and cleanly. So ready to start cutting the glue that holds the lid. But I just thought I'd show you this. These are the 2 types of bolt. These plain bolts with the fat washers go in the 4 corners. The bolts with the shoulders built in, can't really show it any better than that, but anyway, they go on the sides here where the edges are lifted up slightly. So all of the lids from the ZE0 onwards are glued down. Not really possible to see it in here, but it's like a kind of silicone paste that they use to glue the lid down. I find the best thing is one of these oscillating cutters. I can just work its way in here. It's very noisy, so I'm not going to video it, but I have got it on other videos that I've done before, just so you can get an idea of what's involved. It makes it really quick and easy to cut the lid off and then to remove the remaining glue from the faces, which you can clean up. And I use a sealing tape from Worth, which sticks onto the lower part and completely seals the join when you put the lid back on. It's a special foam that expands to around 15mm, compresses back to 3mm, and it's waterproof and windproof. It does mean the lid can be taken off afterwards if necessary. So if you're just changing single cells to try and repair a pack, it's a very good way to do it. I've got another video on my page but I'll show it to you when I get to that stage on this one as well for completeness. So yes, it's noisy, but I'll show you how easily it cuts. It's this simple. I'm going to do the rest without trying to hold the camera. Okay, so I've been around the whole lid with the cutter. Just one point to note, along this section on the left-hand side above the front part of the battery, this is in the factory where the gluing machine starts and stops. So there's overlap of the glue in here, 2 layers, which means that sometimes the glue can actually work its way up inside round this edge, but it does mean that whatever happens, a little bit of extra cutting is involved here because there's a much wider seam inside. Not a problem if you know about it beforehand, but if you don't, it can get very frustrating trying to take the lid off, and this little bit is holding it back. So the top is off. First impressions are that there's just a tiny bit of swelling on these rear modules, but nothing frantic. The front ones don't seem too bad either because the top plates are nice and level. Aiming to try and show you, here we go, on the lid, this bit that I was talking about where there's double glue, you can see where this side has rolled round onto the vertical face. Around here, it still stays glued on for a bit. Just takes a bit of extra persuasion. You can see from the shininess where the cutter has been running on this one to try and make it as easy as possible. So the next task is to make the battery safe on the voltages. Obviously using an insulated tool, which I'll show you in a second. We need to undo the connections that go between the batteries, and we'll also remove the bus bar in here. There's another bus bar in here which we can remove too, and then that reduces the overall voltage that we're dealing with on any particular pack. So I've got a fully insulated 10mm hex tool here, which I'll use for undoing all these battery terminals that I've just shown you and the bus bars. What I will do is insulate these loose cable ends when they come away, just to double if not quadruple the safety levels, and then we'll press on. Usually aim to get this rear bank out first. There's some 10mm bolts holding it down along the front and rear faces, and on the sides there are 13mm bolts. Around here underneath the BMS there's also 13mm bolts, but the BMS comes out nice and easily. It's got its own 10mm bolts holding it in. We can pull that out very easily. So here we go. I use this cloth back tape for insulating the power wires where they come off the rear bank. See, both done. And I've taken off these 2 front bus bars, the one that joins these 2 banks together and the one that joins the relays to the bank here. So that's all now ready for dismantling. Next task is to free off all the cables from their mountings. I'll get the cables out of the BMS and remove the BMS. You can see there's cables clipped on all sorts of places all the way around. The temperature sensors and stuff need to be pulled out, and the harnesses are attached into the back of the modules. In fact, on these later ones, the temperature sensors are built in with the electrics that go on the front here, and that will all come out in one hit because there's a big multi-plug down here that we can remove. So yeah, that's going to be the next major step. But what I'm going to do for the moment is just clean up these faces in case I need to just drop the lid back on to get the battery pack outside for any reason. So I'll show you that, and then we'll press on with the strip down afterwards. So I start with this window cleaning tool, which is just a Stanley knife blade in a holder, and you can use it to scrape off the worst of the rubber gloop that they have everywhere, both here and on the lid here. You can see where all the cutting has left strands of it here. But I'm just going to take the whole lot off, clean the faces up, give them a paint, and then I'll put on that magic reusable sealing foam, and then we're ready to start thinking about pulling out the modules, breaking them all down, getting them tested and calibrated. Okay, so I've been around the outside edge of the lid and the sealing face of the battery with that scraper tool to remove the worst of the glue. Next thing I use is this fibre-based wheel on an electric drill just to tidy up the faces. The beauty with this particular one is that it removes any loose rust as well, and then I can put a lick of paint on the faces here. You can see how the rust has got as far as the seal that they've put on but got no further, which demonstrates again how beautifully waterproof these battery packs are, down to obviously a certain depth. I'm not going to go sticking one out the window of a submarine and expecting it to survive. But anyway, yeah, clean up all the faces, then I can give it a lick of paint and it's ready for the tape once the paint has dried. The tool itself is very noisy, so I'm not going to impose that on you for a great length of time, but just to show you. So you can see there how I can clean back to bare metal all the way around the mating edges. I'll do the same on the lid, but I'm not going to bore you with that because it's noisy and dirty. So I'll get that done and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so that's got the mating faces cleaned up. I'm actually just going to give this one a quick coat of zinc primer spray first because of the rust that's here. The external rust here I'll deal with a shot blaster when I get the lid popped on. So yeah, quick coat of the zinc primer, let that go off, and then I'll put a coat of semi-gloss black on top of it, and then we're away. So here we are, I've cleaned up the mating face on the lid as well. I've got it upside down on top of the battery pack. The zinc primer has dried up nicely, so I'm going to put a lick of paint on both of these and then step away from it for a few hours so that the tape has a chance to glue to something nice and solid, not just damp paint. So the paint is all dried on these surfaces where the glue was, all nice and ready for the tape. This is the magical tape that I used, made by Worth. Here's the part number. The 15.3 tells you that it's 15mm uncompressed and 3mm compressed. You can see here how when it's uncompressed it's like this, but the stuff in the middle of the roll, you can see it there, it's beautifully compressed. So I just put a rim of it around the battery base, ready to take the lid, and then the lid just compresses it down as it needs to. And this is waterproof and windproof, so it's perfect. And of course it means you can just undo the bolts and whip the top off if any extra cell changing needs doing in the future. And there we go, that's the foam tape applied all the way around. By this time tomorrow, the bit that's just come off the roll, you can see here the difference in heights between compressed and uncompressed. That will have all expanded to match the height of this. And as you can see, that just goes all the way around the battery. And when I pop the lid on, that will compress down exactly where it needs to meet the lid. And there'll be no problems with water ingress or air and dirt ingress. It doesn't take many tools from here on in. I've got a power bar with a 13mm socket on it for the bolts on the sides of the rear battery bank, and all the bolts that hold the side pair of batteries down. A bit difficult to see at the moment, but they'll show up later on. Got a 10mm socket here on the air ratchet for undoing all the little bolts. I've got a 16 here for the crossbar. Then I've got a couple of plastic clip removing tools, which I can use for unclipping the wiring, etc. So here we go. Gonna release the wiring and release the BMS first, and then we'll focus on this rear bank. It could be quite easy to forget the temperature sensor for the rear bank. It's just plugged in here on this loom that goes to the BMS, just with a push down fitting on the plug. So just pull it down, release it, and then when the battery bank comes out, that will come out with it. There'll be no snagging. And it's much the same with the connections for the BMS. They've just got these push-in clips on the side and they pull away. Each of the looms is actually color-coded into the BMS, so they can't be put back in the wrong place, so it makes it nice and easy. I'm going to get these two out first, then I'm going to undo the retaining bolts, and then I can lift the BMS up and undo the ones that are underneath, tuck the BMS out of the way for safekeeping. So 2 bolts from the back of the BMS casing, 2 bolts from the front, but I also take out these 2 that hold this cable bracket, because this also gets in the way of removing the BMS, so it'll all pull away nicely and I can unplug everything easily. And it's the same type of multi-plug that we find all over the BMS, so just press and release on the clip here, same here, and then the multi-plug will pull away. And as with the other side, they're color coded and size coded, so they only go back one way. So I'm going to loosen off the 6 big bolts that hold down the end plates for the battery pack with this power bar and socket. Once they're loose, I can revert to the air ratchet to just finish whizzing them out. And then when they're done, the 10mm ones will come straight out with the air ratchet, so they're no problem. I usually use my 2-post workshop ramp for lifting the batteries out, because quite clearly it has plenty of power. So yeah, a couple of chains diagonally across the battery, one there, and then one loop through the middle, and then we can just lift this clean out. I can maneuver it onto the arm to drop down behind where I've got some floor space for dismantling the battery pack. So there we go. This is the rearmost battery bank. It looks exactly the same on the 40 kilowatt hour batteries. So obviously it's possible to rebuild this with 40 kilowatt hour modules. Ideally, if you're doing that, you need the 40 kilowatt hour BMS, and there's a current sensor that I can supply with the Virgin BMS. So if you can get new cells, and there are places that sell them, you could rebuild one of these as a 40 and just plug and play with the new BMS and current sensor, and you'd be away. But anyway, here we go. This is nice and easy. Once it's down on the floor, I'm going to take these cable mounting brackets off, and then these braces which run, there's 2 of them that run across the front of the pack here, and there's one that runs all the way across the back. I'm going to take those off once it's down on the floor. I don't do it while it's up in the air, because then that would leave just the bolts that pass through supporting the whole thing, and I'm not comfortable doing that because it's big and heavy. So I'm going to drop it down and take the various bits off. With these, because I'm making the empty case available for anyone who wants to use it for any type of cell, I put all the nuts and bolts into a little pot, which will be in the casing with all of the brackets, all of the mountings, all of the cables. The only things that won't be in there are the cells, which I'm going to test separately and then sell them on for renewable storage. Trying to think the name of the people, Vivnet, I believe, show a cabinet, ready-made cabinet to just drop the 24 or the 30 kilowatt hour modules into, so you have a ready-made cabinet for solar storage. But if you don't want to buy one off the shelf, it's perfectly feasible to buy, for instance, JK BMSs, as I have here, and build a unit to suit your own purposes, as big as you like. Obviously, the more cells you can get, the more power you can store, and the more reliable your battery backup system will be. So that's all the bolts and the brackets removed from this rearmost edge as it's in the car. It now means that I can roll the battery pack onto its back. Obviously I'll put another plank of wood down there because I just don't like putting them straight on the floor. I can roll it onto its back and then It makes it much easier for dealing with the bus bars and the front brackets. I like to mark the brackets with a bit of red. So I'll whip them off and then we can look at the bus bar assembly. So the white outer covers just clip on at these spaces, and therefore obviously they just clip off. So they're all undone and out the way, and now we've just got an assortment of 10mm bolts and these Phillips headed screws. This shows you where the heat sensor is for the rear bank, which is part of the reason it's not hugely accurate. On the older type of batteries, it used to be round the back of the battery and poked in between the cells. Here it's just in effect taking the heat sense from any heat that comes through from this middle cell. So not as accurate as we would like, but that's the way they build them, so that's the way we put them back together. So if the BMS sensor wires were going to be removed, which they don't need to be on this because I'll take them off with the whole plastic backing which carries the bus bars as well, but if you were going to remove them, obviously now would be a good time to number which one does what, because then it saves you a lot of time later checking the pin out positions on the multi-plug. But yeah, they will stay attached to the orange plastic, so that if this is rebuilt with factory modules, it's very easy just to bolt everything back together and plug it all back into the BMS. Conversely, if you're using aftermarket modules, the best kits actually come with their own wiring loom, but it's entirely feasible to use loose modules from different car batteries, at which stage ideally you'd need to be numbering these before they come off the orange backing. So that's all the bolts and screws removed from the bus bar retainer and from the sensor wires. And these are just clipped onto the modules, so they pull up very easily when the time comes, and that's it. So we're now ready to look at undoing the 4 bolts that hold the whole lot together, and then that's done. So there's 4 long threaded rods that go right through the whole battery. The 4 that we need to be looking at are this end with the longer threads on them. These are the ones that pull down when you build it. So these are the ones that we undo. The nuts, the other end, are self-locking onto the threaded bars. Now the bars generally don't tend to turn because they're kind of in position inside each module, so it's usually just a case of undoing the 4 nuts, but for the sake of completeness I just undo each one a little bit in turn, a bit like we're taking a wheel off a car or whatever, never just undoing one and then letting the other 3 carry all the strain. So a little bit on each one. Again, another good reason to be using the air tool, because there's a lot of technical fiddling to be done here. But yeah, once these 4 are off, we can withdraw the 4 retaining rods and then put the end brackets into the empty battery case along with all the rest, and I'll start to run the strength testing on the modules. So I usually roll the battery pack back onto its longer edge so that it's well supported, and also so that there's no load being taken by these threaded bosses when you're trying to pull the bars out. So these will literally just pull out of the battery pack now that undone. And of course, once they're out, that's basically it. So we've got the end plates, both ends, and all the modules are now loose, ready for testing. Just going to put the nut back on this last rod, and then, as with everything else, put it back in the battery pack ready for its new owner. So I'm ready to start testing the individual cells. I'm using this Zetec battery load tester. I bought the stronger one, which goes up to I think 30 or 40 amps worth of charge and discharge to give them a good workout and give me a good value. A good test result whilst under a decent load, which shows up any weak cells, but it's very straightforward to use. Obviously the first thing is some mains power to it, and then we need to plug in the USB line to the laptop. Just waiting for the laptop to fire up properly. And then we have, for each cell, and obviously there's 96 of them in total in the battery pack, we have an earth and a positive with a current sensor as well. Bit of a jumble here because I've only just taken it back off the shelf, but anyway, here we go. So first one, you can see that the cell has a red on it, which is a positive. So that's clipped on there. For testing the first cell, this central connection becomes the negative for the first cell. Just making sure it's done up nice and tight so that there's no heat generation. Once we've tested the first one, we basically move the 2 of them across. So this becomes the negative for the second cell, and this becomes the positive for the first cell. Again, because this one's colored black, it's dead easy to see. So I've got this switched on. Once the laptop fires up, I will show you the program that is available through ZKE Tech so that you can do a very easy hands-off load test. So this is the program that comes with the battery tester. If we go to connect to the battery now, sorry, I've only just fired the laptop up, so it's going to keep coming up with these. Right, so we're now connected through COM4. What we want to do is a cycle test. Because I've done cycle tests previously, I actually have them saved. So I'm going to open up when it responds to us, and we'll go from there. Okay, so my stored file of test procedures has opened up. I'm going to open up this one, which is the test and store up to 35 amps. So you can see here that what it's going to do is charge the battery up to full at 35 amps, all the way up to 4.2 volts. It then waits for a period to let it settle. It then discharges at 40 amps down to 2.8 volts, during which time it will then show us the amp hours that it's drawn back out of the battery. And then for storage, it recharges at 25 amps up to 3.27 volts. And then we just let it sit and we move on to the next cell. So it's really very straightforward. Just got to close this screen out of our way. So it's literally just a case of, now that we're all connected here, powered up here. We literally just go start, and then you can see that the telltale shows that these had a fair amount of charge in them already. They were already over 3.95 volts. The red line is showing me the amperage, and the blue is showing me the voltage in the battery. So this one will come up to 4.2 volts, and then it will continue going through its process. I'll show you the complete graph once it's finished. It takes about an hour to test each cell, so as you can work out, there's 96 to 100 hours worth of testing work here, and it's why I go through each cell to make sure that I can write onto each cell how strong it is, and then when people want to buy them for storage, they know exactly what they're buying, because I sell them basically by the kilowatt hour. So here are all the batteries I've got lined up, modules lined up, ready to test them all. You can tell these are rear modules because they come with the mounting brackets, and they also have a bolt hole in the back. But if you're buying replacement modules, you don't necessarily need to worry about having the brackets, because this top metal plate comes off very easily, and you can swap it from your donor battery onto your replacement module as needed, so that you can build up a full set if necessary to replace the back as you need it. I have done a separate video on this. I will try and link it in the description, and if you're watching this and it's not there, please send me a note so that my dreadful memory gets triggered to trace the link, but you'll find it in my channel. And obviously, if you want to like and subscribe, you'll get notifications of new videos as they come anyway. So you can see this first module has already reached 4.2 volts. So the red line shows that the current to the battery is dropping away gradually. It means that the voltage is absolutely steady at 4.2 volts. Once it's finished dropping away, I've got it set to stay for a while to make sure the battery is properly fully charged. Then it will go into the discharge routine, having waited for a short period, and then it will show me the amp hour reading, which I can write onto the cell, and then when it's finished discharging, it will also just recharge, as I said, to 3.27 volts for safe storage. Okay, so now it's time to focus on taking out the front banks. First thing we've got to do is make sure all the wiring is disconnected. So there's some BMS wiring here, both sides, going to each one. The current sensor bus bar is sitting on top of this one, so we need to release that. But the easiest thing is to just undo the 4 nuts and bolts that hold this whole assembly in, and then it can just be drawn out of the way for while the module banks are being released. This lot gets in the way slightly, so again, I'll just pop the bolts out of there, and then we can pull that out of the way as we need to. And it's the same at the front here. There's a couple of wiring assemblies that will get in the way slightly. All I do with these is just bend the brackets out of the way once the wiring is free, and then we're ready to undo the bolts that secure them. But first, once we've disconnected or loosened off the wiring, because this one won't come all the way out because it's attached underneath here, but we can undo this off the cross brace. We can get the cross brace out of the way as the first step, and then we can focus on the rest of the wiring and then the bolts that hold these side forward module assemblies into position. So with the 16mm and the 13mm bolts undone from the crossbar, I've pulled this power lead out of the way as well from here, but I'll pop it back afterwards. It just goes over the top of the crossbar here, but with that, the crossbar lifts out easily, and then we're ready to be doing the bolts holding down the module assemblies. So I've got the 8 13mm nuts removed for this side. 4 in here, you can see the thread there, etc. And the same on the other side. So now it's time to lift it up. What you have to be aware with these is if you just lift them from the lifting eyes, they can try and fold in the middle. So what I like to do is have a chain that goes from the 2 outer edges via the middle to give it good support all the way. and then I can just lift the whole bank up and out. I'll show you. Here you can see with the battery testing how we've reached our time limit on the reduction of the amperage. The volts held in the battery obviously drop away slightly because it's a degraded battery, so they drop down while it's on its pause mode so that it starts at a realistic voltage rather than a fake full 4.2. So the realistic full is going to be about 4.12, which shows that the cells are predictably degraded. They are from a 30 kilowatt hour after all. It took 28 minutes to charge this battery, best part of. We're going to go on for, from memory, 10 minutes pause while the battery kind of relaxes into its true state, and then it will start the discharge, which will give us the full value of the amperes in this particular cell. And when it's recharged for storage, we can move on to the next one. So hopefully you can see here how I've got the chain attached in 3 places. One goes from this corner down to this central bolt, and I use a couple of washers obviously to spread the load. The rest of the chain comes from the other corner again down to this central bolt, so that when I lift, it's lifting on all 3 chains all at once, and then it saves this bracket from folding in the middle, because if that folds, it can bend this bus bar that connects the front and the rear sections of this bank together. So better safe than sorry. And there we go. The right hand bank is now lifted clear of the battery pack. I'm going to do exactly the same as I did with the rear bank, that I will drop it down onto the plank of wood, and then I can roll it onto its back to take off the bus bars and everything. And then these ones need to be rolled back flat so that we can take out the bolts that hold the modules to the retaining plate. But it shows you how much protection there is for the battery from puncture from underneath, because if anything wanted to puncture it, it would have to go through this, as well as all of this battery casing, as well as obviously the plastic under trays, which admittedly wouldn't provide that much resistance, but there's plenty of distance and plenty of metal between anything that might want to penetrate the battery and the actual modules themselves. I understand from what I've seen that these modules can tolerate a certain amount of penetration without actually having any permanent issues with overheating or catching fire. So as with the rear bank, I've rolled this front bank onto its back with a bit of wood underneath it to stop it from tipping too far. So the first thing on these is to undo these big bus bars that join the front and the rear packs. This one has to come off first because it's obscuring the other bolts that hold the other bus bar on, but all the bus bars have to come off before we can take the white covers off of the cell screws. Quite clearly the bolts that go through the bus bars are cell screws anyway, so they'll go in the cell screw pot, and then we'll put the pot into the battery once it's all dismantled for the next buyer. So with the big bus bar out of the way, this little door can be opened up to get to the bolt that holds this bus bar on. There's a matching door on the rear end here, so we'll just whip these two out quickly. I'll show you that the bus bars themselves are basically just clipped onto the battery pack. So we'll get these two undone and out of here. That's that. And then the bus bar literally is just clipped on. So up it comes and away. And now we can do the same as we did with the rear. We can take off the white covers, and that will then expose all the rest of the bolts and screws that hold the plastic bus bar retainers onto the battery, with obviously its loom for all the sensor wires. So that'll come off in one piece so that it's easy to refit, and then we're ready to take the modules off the mounting plate. Okay, so that's all the bolts and screws removed, and the same as with the rear pack, the bus bar orange support assembly is just clipped on, so it lifts up and pulls away, And now we're ready to roll this back onto the support plate here on the plank, and then we can undo the bolts that hold it all together, and we're ready to line those up for testing too. Okay, so that's the second front bank out. This one's the left hand side, as you can see. It's an exact mirror image of what we've just done on the right hand side, so I'm not going to insult you by making you sit right through it. The car lift ramp is lowering it down nice and gently onto the board that I've provided for it, and then I'll pull it all to pieces, put all the bits back inside the casing. While I'm waiting for it to drop back down, I'm just going to reattach this that I detached earlier to make it easier to get the brackets out, because the seal on the top here is useful when I refit the lid. It will help to make the battery watertight while it's in storage. In the meantime, the first cell, after an hour and 11 minutes or so, has now finished discharging. It's showing me a capacity of 21.72 amp hours, which is not brilliant, but such is life. It's an old 30 kilowatt hour module cell, so it's just going to pause for a minute, and then it's going to charge back up to the 3.27 volts for storage, and then I can move on to the next one. So there's a little giveaway here in the bus bar bank on the left hand side. There's a temperature sensor here and a temperature sensor here. We know there's one on the rear bank, but there's absolutely no temperature sensing on the right hand front bank. I appreciate that in theory they're a matched pair and they should reflect each other, but there's a train of thought that says that one of these temperature sensors really ought to have gone on the other side, just for better battery monitoring.